Some emotionally harmful people don't look arrogant, loud, or obviously controlling. In fact, they may seem quiet, insecure, sensitive, even deeply wounded. And that's part of what makes covert narcissism confusing. You leave conversations feeling guilty, mentally tangled, emotionally drained, or strangely responsible for their moods, but you can't always explain why. When most people hear the word narcissist, they picture someone grandiose and attention-seeking. Covert narcissism is different. The person may appear shy, humble, misunderstood, or emotionally fragile. But underneath that softer presentation, the same core issues can still exist: a fragile ego, a strong need for validation, poor accountability, and low empathy. This is important, though. This is not a diagnosis guide. Trauma, anxiety, depression, insecurity, and stress can sometimes look similar. Everybody can act defensive or self-centered at times. The key is patterns, repeated patterns, especially patterns that leave other people confused, silenced, or emotionally exhausted. The first group of red flags revolves around a fragile ego. The first is hypersensitivity to criticism. Even gentle feedback feels like a personal attack. You say something simple like, "Hey, can you let me know if you're running late?" And suddenly they shut down, become cold, or act deeply wounded. Sometimes they flip it around completely. Instead of discussing the issue, they say things like, "I guess I'm just a terrible person." Now you're comforting them instead of addressing the original problem. Healthy people can feel hurt by criticism too, but emotionally healthy people usually stay connected to the conversation. They can say, "That stings, but I understand your point." The red flag is when feedback consistently leads to punishment, guilt, or emotional retaliation. The second red flag is chronic victimhood. Covert narcissists often position themselves as the most wronged person in every situation. Nothing is simply conflict. Everything becomes evidence that people mistreat them, fail them, misunderstand them, or don't appreciate them enough. You bring up something hurtful they did, and within minutes the conversation becomes about how hard their life has been. Their suffering becomes a shield against accountability. Over time, this creates a strange emotional dynamic where your needs feel selfish and their feelings dominate the room. The third red flag is hidden grandiosity. This one surprises people because covert narcissists may look insecure on the surface, but underneath, there's often a quiet sense of superiority. They may believe they're more emotionally intelligent, more moral, deeper, or more special than other people, even while acting self-deprecating. You might hear subtle comments like, "Most people just don't understand me," or "I'm different from everyone else." The message underneath is often, "I'm exceptional," and people fail to recognize it. The next group of red flags centers around control through confusion. Fourth is passive aggression. Instead of direct communication, they punish indirectly, silent treatment. Sarcasm. Forgetting things that matter to you. Agreeing outwardly but quietly undermining you later. This creates constant uncertainty. You find yourself wondering, are they upset? Did I do something wrong? And because the hostility is indirect, confronting it can make you seem dramatic or oversensitive. Fifth is gaslighting and blame shifting. This is one of the most psychologically damaging patterns because it erodes your trust in your own perception. You remember a conversation clearly, and they insist it never happened. They minimize your reaction. They rewrite events, or they make their behavior your fault. "I only reacted that way because you pushed me." After enough of this, many people start over-explaining themselves, apologizing constantly, or replaying arguments in their head, trying to figure out what's real. Healthy conflict may involve disagreement, but it doesn't consistently leave one person feeling mentally scrambled and unable to trust their own memory. The sixth red flag is hidden entitlement. Covert narcissists may not openly demand special treatment, but they often expect it quietly. They assume their needs should take priority. They expect emotional caretaking without reciprocity. Maybe they become offended if you need space. Maybe your boundaries are treated like rejection. Maybe there are invisible emotional rules you're expected to follow, and when you fail these unspoken tests, they withdraw affection or act wounded. Over time, the relationship becomes centered around managing them. The third group of red flags involve emotional disconnection. The seventh red flag is lack of empathy, or what looks like empathy without follow-through. Covert narcissists can sometimes sound emotionally aware. They may know the right comforting words, but genuine empathy requires consistency, accountability, and sacrifice. The difference shows up when your feelings inconvenience them. For example, they may appear supportive until your pain requires sustained attention, compromise, or accountability from them. Then, suddenly, they become irritated, dismissive, or emotionally absent. You start realizing their support often disappears the moment the spotlight leaves them. The eighth red flag is quiet envy. They struggle to celebrate other people fully. Compliments come with subtle digs, success gets minimized, you share good news, and instead of genuine excitement, you get comments like, "must be nice," or "I could have done that too if I cared about that kind of thing." This slowly trains people to shrink themselves. You stop sharing achievements because every positive moment somehow becomes emotionally heavy. The final group of red flags involve relationship instability. Ninth is the withdrawn or shy presentation that masks control. This is why covert narcissism is often missed. The person may genuinely appear anxious, introverted, or emotionally fragile, and sometimes they are. But the important question is not whether someone is shy, it's whether the relationship becomes emotionally one-sided and controlling. Do they expect constant reassurance? Do they avoid accountability by acting too hurt to confront? Do you feel guilty for having normal expectations because they seem so fragile? Shyness alone is not narcissism. The pattern matters. The 10th red flag is push-pull relationships and boundary violations. These relationships often swing between closeness and withdrawal. One moment you feel deeply valued. The next, you feel criticized, emotionally abandoned, or iced out. Then, when you start pulling away, they suddenly reconnect, apologize, or pull you back in emotionally. This cycle creates instability and emotional dependency. You spend more time trying to regain emotional safety than actually feeling safe. A lot of people in these dynamics describe the same symptoms: walking on eggshells, over-apologizing, anxiety before interactions, emotional exhaustion, and confusion after conflicts. And this is where an important reality check matters. Don't rush to label every difficult person a covert narcissist. Look for repeated patterns over time, especially repeated avoidance of accountability, punishment for boundaries, emotional manipulation, and empathy failures. A socially anxious person may struggle socially, but still care deeply about your feelings. A depressed person may withdraw, but still take responsibility when they hurt someone. The issue is not imperfection. The issue is whether the relationship consistently revolves around protecting one person's ego at everyone else's expense. So what do you do if these patterns feel familiar? Focus less on proving their intentions and more on observing impact. Use short, calm boundaries instead of long, emotional explanations. Pay attention to what happens when you say no. Healthy people may not always like boundaries, but they generally respect them over time. Manipulative dynamics often escalate when boundaries appear. It also helps to reality check with trusted people, because these relationships can distort your perspective slowly. And finally, remember this: the label matters less than the pattern. If someone repeatedly distorts reality, avoids accountability, punishes boundaries, and leaves you emotionally depleted, that dynamic deserves serious attention.